that off going now. And we're right to go. So I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on in this area, the Yagara and the Turrbal people. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders, past, present and emerging, and to any elders who are here tonight. And also I'd like to pay my respects to the elders of the land that you are joining me from. So all around Australia, you'll be joining me from many different Aboriginal nations. And I'd like to pay my respects to their elders. This was and always will be Aboriginal land, and sovereignty was never ceded. And to start our event on Storytelling Land, we're going to start with a little bit of storytelling. So we have tonight with us three writers who have been working in various capacities through workshops at Avid Reader to work on their own writing. So they're emerging writers, and they all work in very different fields, but all three of them have one thing in common, and that this is their first time that they will be reading publicly, and they'll be reading publicly to you all. So we're very excited to introduce them to you. We're going to start tonight with John Arnold, who is from Innisfail in far north Queensland and began writing as a means of escape after his internment in a Brisbane Catholic boys' school. In 2013, he won the Bristol Prize for the short story Naked as Eve, and he's now a student in the Faber Academy, which meets at Avid Reader. So I'd like everyone to welcome John Arnold. Hello, John.
Thank you. Thanks, Chrissy. Thanks, everybody. The book we're here for tonight is so beautiful and writes so beautiful and contains such beautiful language about trees that I did not want to be that ambitious. So I have written tonight about houseplants and introduced species. It's called Singapore Daisy. Possible to see the sky, of course. The sun was inescapable, and the brief intermittent showers of rain. But the cane crowded the house, green and indifferent. Its glossy ribbons rattled. Its chattering could be heard down the lino-covered hallway. Possible to find the horizon, but only from the tiled veranda. From the shed, from the tractor, from the garden. The crop, flowering now in July and cut green in November, clogged the view of the mountains, of the sea, of all the other places where this place ended. Daisy, although I wasn't to call her that, had gathered her plants. She'd taken them up from the red soil, had raised them high above the green wall. Fluffy terriers lifted into a lady's arms, safe from the jaws of a Doberman, the arse sniffing of a persistent stray. Her beauties were housed in copper pots, in obsolete china teapots with broken spouts. Variegated bromeliad, she nodded, as though identifying guests at a party. Cordyline, Zanzibar gem, tricky, very tricky, hydrophobic. And that one? Bugger. Don't ask me the name. My mother-in-law called it Little Angel Redfeet. I nodded at each sprawling, untidy plant as it was introduced, smiled and politely ignored their suckers, their thorns, their scandent feelers, trailing hairs. Every single one of them looked like a triffid. How did you find me, darling? Daisy was sitting in sunshine. The tube that fed her oxygen glowed white. Her hair was as fine as a newborn's, but defiantly, unapologetically bronze-coloured. A large clip-on gold earring hung from one ear. The other had dropped to her shoulder and was slowly inching its way across her vast, silk-covered bosom. My dad told me you lived out here. I fiddled with my phone. He does local history. Whores are in the history books now, she breathed in, and beside her, an oxygen tank hissed, an arrow in a tiny dial spinning. Well, I'm pleased. Books are full of soldiers, but what about us? Like writing about bees without mentioning the bloody flowers. Who's your father? Romano. I gestured to myself absurdly, then dropped my hands, uttered my father's name. Tony Romano. Antonio. She turned her face towards the sugar cane as though distracted. Small boy, Antonio, tiny bones. I remember seeing him in his sandals and shorts trailing after Anna in Mrs. Malek's shop. When your nonna saw me, she made the sign of the cross, turned away. I blew your father a kiss. I was wearing yellow. The oxygen tank whispered again, and she paused, as though allowing for the interruption of a dinner guest. Yellow silken pearls. Do you think there was another woman wearing silk in this town so soon after the war? Not even the mayor's wife, not even stuck-up Cecilia Rossi. She raised one hand, brown and with enlarged knuckles, gold rings sparkling, banded deep within the flesh. Of course, I had an awful lot of money. Men sold their fathers' watches, even their cars once or twice to be with me. The captains of the luggers used to pay me in pearls. I had so money, I used them as marbles. They all came to me. I was a legend. I was their golden flower. I was their Singapore daisy. Around the house, the glossy tops of the cane applauded in the wind.
Oh, that is beautiful. Thank you so much for that reading. That's excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chum.
Lovely.
You can see the quality of the writing of some of the people that have been working at AVID in these various workshops that we've been running is just extraordinary. So thank you very much for that. And we'll now go straight to our next reader, Cassandra Lawani. And Cassandra has a passion for spirituality and healing, arose at the age of 17 out of the need to go beyond childhood wounds. In the wake of healing, her creative connection began to flourish in her late 20s. The two worlds converged in their 30s, resulting in her memoir, The Invitation to Live Differently. Everybody welcome Cassandra.
Thank you. My piece is about 2/3 of the way into my memoir, and it starts, my husband and I had just moved from Melbourne to Brisbane, and that's what it's about. During the day, I sat alone in our one-bedroom inner-city apartment, listening to the whipping clunks of trains passing by. Our unit was small, nicely finished with polished timber floors and freshly painted walls. A tall fence blocking the train line took up most of the view from my front door, except for the top of an old tree in the distance. Its smooth, light grey trunk and leafless branches inspired me to get out my drawing pad. Since moving to Brisbane, my art supplies were coming out more often. I felt like nature was calling me to capture it. Intrigued by my new home, I decided to venture into the city to have a look at the Gallery of Modern Art in South Bank. After meeting Dee for a coffee in the CBD, I walked across the bridge to the Culture Centre on the opposite side of Brisbane River. Upon entering the building, I felt my soul expand. I loved the feeling of the great open space. At a leisurely pace, I strolled through, absorbing paintings, craft, photography, and sculptures. Mammoth windows at the back of Gomar looked out onto the river, lined with trees so giant they blocked the sight of buildings on the opposite side. Rigid man-made materials of the building fused with the epic display of nature. It wasn't just the art that inspired me, but the whole setting. I left the exhibit feeling enriched, grateful that my life was now balanced enough to enjoy experiences like these. Brisbane was the perfect place to be an artist. Its subtropical climate birthed colours of intense vibrancy unlike anywhere else in Australia, especially unlike what I was accustomed to down south in Melbourne. If I had to assign Melbourne a colour, it would be a depressing shade of overcast grey. Brisbane, on the other hand, had a consistent backdrop of life-affirming blues and greens, with a kaleidoscope of rich hues in between. On my walks around the neighbourhood, I saw an array of new trees and plants. Turmeric orange flowers shot out from the bird of paradise in fan-like shapes, similar to cockatoo hair or the grooves of Sydney Opera House. Fuchsia pink bougainvillea vines consume fence lines in a colourful strangulation. Late spring set off a chain reaction of blooming jacaranda trees. The ground beneath them soon to be covered in delicately woven blankets of lilac petals. Nature put on a spectacular show, igniting the artist in me in the process. At the end of our street was a small art studio that offered painting classes. I signed up and chose a magnolia flower as my first piece. The old Queenslander-style house creaked as I walked up the stairs, listening to the sound of the unkempt timber floorboards crackling under my feet. Upstairs, the weathered dwelling had charm of a foregone era and a quirkiness that made for the perfect spot to paint a picture. Retirees frequented the class mostly, and then there was me in my late 20s. Soon you'll be pregnant, my art teacher Celia half joked. What does your husband think of your painting? He thinks it's nice, I replied with a warm smile. I think he sees you through rose-coloured glasses, she smirked. I giggled, skimming off the lavishness from her comment. I had never really thought about my relationship with Dee like that before. I just knew we were smitten. A wonderful sense of sweetness and love existed between us. The way that appeared to the outside world had not crossed my mind. Celia's remark made a little dent. I realised how lucky I was to be with such a generous person, participating in a joyous relationship, unlike all the other horrible ones. Over the next few days, I did some painting at home and finished my magnolia. Staring out at the old grey tree from my front door, I realised this would be the perfect time to have a child. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Gats. Thank you. You really captured Brisbane in all its luscious glory in that. So thank you very much.
Okay.
Excellent. So our next reader today is Jacqueline Knight. Jacqueline is a participatory design and innovation practitioner. She holds an MBA and Masters of Communication and has spent a large portion of her working life writing corporate communications and academic papers. She's now attempting to unleash her creative writing skills and is undertaking the emotionally charged task of writing her memoir about loss. Everybody welcome Jacqueline.
Thanks, Chrissy. Okay, so this is just a piece I've been working on in the workshop we've been doing with Chris Olsen. It's called Pressing Flowers. Memories of my Oma, like the trees and flowers that grew along Eden Road where she lived, are coloured in purples and blues. Jacarandas in seemingly perpetual bloom line the long corridor of houses, littering pavements in piles of purple, their lavender trumpets pressed into the concrete like a bruise. Hydrangeas, puffed and poised, stood erect alongside the driveways, like a welcoming committee of old ladies, their heads clumped together tightly, petals tinted in a soft blue rinse. Pansies tucked neatly into garden beds, rows and rows of velvety flowers and smudged lilac faces fanned out to the sun, streaks of colour running down their cheeks like mascara. We would press the pansies, carefully tuck them into tissue paper, and then place them inside the pages of an old telephone book. When they were dry, she would create pictures using the delicate flower fossils, her two-dimensional floral arrangements preserved like a still life under the glass of a picture frame. I was fascinated by the process of pressing flowers, the idea that a flower could be treasured forever, captured in one moment and then enjoyed again and again. I loved the surprise in finding floral relics long forgotten in the pages of whichever heavy book had been enlisted as a flower press. Just recently, I discovered several pieces of baking paper folded into the pages of my Oxford Dictionary, tucked between thalamus and theatre, were the dried remains of flowers, mementos from where I was living several years ago. The flowers have lost most of their colour, except for one. One of its petals is peeled back, revealing its crimson origin. Once alive and vibrant, the flowers are now sepia-toned. The translucent petals are soft and papery, just like the skin that covered her hands, veiling the rigidness of her swollen joints beneath. She was 48 years old when she was diagnosed with arthritis, 6 years older than I am now. The arthritis forced her hands into strange triangular shapes, her knuckles and fingers arched up like a tent. I would try to straighten out her fingers and hands, press them flat like we did the pansies, but they were never compliant. Neither were the joints in her feet and toes, which resembled gnarled and knotted tree roots, protruding obstinately from any shoe that tried to contain it, just as the jacarandas did along the pavements of Eden Road. The average lifespan of a jacaranda tree is 50 years. My Oma lived to 64. Unfortunately, the effects of her arthritis didn't stop at her joints. Inflammatory conditions like arthritis are notorious for increasing the risk of heart disease, as are some of the drugs used to treat it. There seemed to be any number of curious ailments that she would be willing to try in an effort to alleviate her pain. I can even remember the faces she'd pull after downing an undiluted shot of apple cider vinegar, aloe vera, or whatever alternate remedy my mother may have found for her. Pansies have even been used to treat arthritis, alleged to have anti-inflammatory properties. It wouldn't surprise me if she tried pansies as a remedy, But like the other ailments and ointments that she did try, or the operations she endured, pansies could not cure her.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. It's really wonderful to think that a person's life can be equated to the life of a particular tree. I really hadn't thought about that before. It was really lovely to hear that too in your work. Thanks for that. So thank you for our three readers and for bearing with us. We were going to have this salon in real life twice. We were going to have this as a real life event, and we've ultimately had to switch to Zoom. But it's really wonderful that we could finally meet you here under these circumstances. So thank you all for coming. And now I'm going to pass over to Sally to continue with our main event. As I said, this particular event has been delayed, and it's such a shame that we're not having it in person, because this book is such a physically beautiful piece of work, and it is the sort of thing that you really, really need to see in real life. It is such a gorgeous piece of work. So congratulations to you, Janine, for creating.
Thank you.
So to take us further, I'm going to introduce Sally Piper, who's the author of The Geography of Friendship, shortlisted for an Australian Book Industry Award and to be adapted as a 6-part TV series, which is wonderful, and Grace's Table, shortlisted for a Queensland Literary Award. Her third novel, Bone Memories, I'm desperate to read, and it will be published by the University of Queensland Press next year. I have heard such great things about this manuscript, and I am really, really looking forward to this. Everybody welcome Sally Piper.
Thanks, Chrissy. Before I speak with you, Janine, I'd just like to also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land where I am this evening, which is the Turrbal and Yagara people, and pay my respects to all elders, past, present and emerging. And I would also like to thank First Nations people everywhere for their careful custodianship of these lands for which sovereignty was never ceded, and to express my deep sorrow and regret that the same care hasn't been afforded the land since colonisation. Janine, I had to really do an abridged version of your bio because your work is extensive, what you've done. So Janine Burke is an art historian, curator, photographer and award-winning novelist. She's published 20 books, no less. In 1975, Janine curated Australian Women Artists, 1840 to 1940 at the George Patton Gallery. And the resulting book remains a standard text in Australian art. Also in the 1970s, Janine co-founded the Victorian Women's Art Movement and LIP, the Feminist Arts Journal. And as trustee of Heidi Museum of Modern Art, Janine wrote several books and curated exhibitions on the Heidi Modernist Circle. She published The Gods of Freud, Sigmund Freud's art collection, and curated Freud and Eros for the Freud Museum, London. And more recently, her practices focused on nature. Her books and curatorial projects have included Source, Nature's Healing Role in Art and Writing, Nest, The Art of Birds, and the exhibition Human Animal Artist, Art Inspired by Animals. And her photographs are held in the collections of Heidi Museum of Modern Art, Monash University of Art, and the National Gallery of Australian Research Library. That's just half it. I could have gone on, Janine. That's a wonderful career. Congratulations.
Thank you.
But, now to this absolutely beautiful book, stunning in cover and content. So is this book number 21, maybe? And
What, sorry?
Is this book number 21?
Yeah, it's about number 21.
Well,
that's right.
This is an absolutely fascinating blend of trees, forests and gardens, and the art that sometimes depicts them and those people for whom these places were or are significant, to include Janine herself. It begins in Elwood in Victoria, the forest of Janine's home, and it travels to such disparate places as Freud's Couch, the Garden of Eden, the Tasmanian wilderness and Nuremberg Park. It's a book rich with unexpected surprises and stop-offs along the way, meandering through such diverse subject matter as philosophy, religion, myth, artists and their work, and of course, forests and trees. It takes readers back to the deep past, then it skillfully segues to the present, capturing human connections to the natural world in the most thoughtful and illuminating ways. It's an absolutely wonderful read. But Janine, I thought we'd start in Eltham this evening, just as your book does. And you say on page 6 of your book, in relation to Sydney Parkinson, you say he's a botanical artist on board the HMS Endeavour. And he says, who better than an artist to assess the country's aesthetic qualities? And when you look at the tree, it made me wonder, when you look at the trees in your local area of Eltham, is it through the eyes of an artist or a naturist?
Well, there are probably lots of different sets of eyes. There's probably the eyes of an amateur naturalist. I don't have any, I'm an art historian, that's my training. I don't have any background in science. I think the trees have managed to teach me quite a lot about science, because if you want to understand trees, then you have to understand botany. So I began to read a lot of scientific articles to research the book. And I think it just takes a long time to get to know the natural world. You have to be quite humble, and you have to sort of walk the same path, if you like, almost every day, which I do when I walk through Elwood, and I look at the same trees. And I, of course, at the moment, it's the busiest season of the year for the birds. The birds are all making nests. I was watching some noisy miners today, and some mudlarks, and they're all making nests in the trees and buzzing around and getting very territorial. So it's very it's an interesting combination, I think, viewing nature. There's one part of it which is teaching you a whole lot of stuff, and then awakening your kind of imagination. Why is that bird doing that? And why does that tree do that? And also it is something that, is very consoling. I found it so during our various lockdowns in Melbourne. We're in our 6th lockdown now. And it's wonderful to walk out into the natural world and see that sort of continuity, because we've lost our continuity, at the moment, particularly here in Australia. Everything's become fragmented, and people are at a loss, and they're experiencing brain fog, and they're depressed, and they've got every reason to be depressed. They're probably not earning the money that they once did. So I think nature, it sort of settles you down when you really kind of engage with it. And I talk about a tree that I remember it was, I wrote a biography of the Australian artist Albert Tucker, and I was due to talk at his funeral in 1999 when he died, and I was feeling really hyped up, and anxious about the whole day. And I've never been much of a tree hugger, but I went and put my arms around this big sugar gum, a eucalypt, and I could really feel all of that tension was just sort of slowly going away. It was like I took a deep breath, and I'm like, okay, I'm fine now. I can cope with this day, whatever it might offer me. So I think trees offer us such an enormous amount of information, kind of hard information, scientific information. And then, what poet and what artist hasn't been inspired by trees and hasn't given their view of trees? So it's the book is a kind of compendium of a lot of different perspectives on trees, from the Bible to Sigmund Freud and there's a lot about Aboriginal people, First Nations people, people who lived here where I live in Elwood. This is the home of the Yalukut Willem people. It's still their home, it's still their land. We didn't buy it from them, we just took it off them and moved in. So there's a lot of information and lessons that you get to learn, I think, once you identify with trees.
And I think lockdown has perhaps revealed that to people more and more. I certainly know where I live that lockdown has brought people out into nature more. I'm a bushwalker, and I see more people on the tracks now than we used to see. So I think if there's any silver lining in what we're all going through, it's that people are making that engagement more. You mentioned that you're not a country girl, that you grew up in suburbia, where an environment that has in many ways been designed by the forces of urban planners and not natural ones. Do you ever think about how different your relationship might be with the natural world if you'd grown up in the country? Do you think that's had an impact on the way, the stage at which...
I would probably be more knowledgeable. Well, I'm kind of kind of knowledgeable now in a very basic way. I mean, once you start researching and writing about nature, you just realize what an ignorant fool you are, because, you know, nature's like the biggest and most interesting encyclopedia that you could ever get your hands on. You know, there's so much information. And the thing about the natural world is, as soon as there's a law that says, well, this always happens, there will be like a kind of contradiction to that law. You know, something else will happen. So you have to kind of be very attentive to that. So I guess it was a really slow process. And, you know, I wrote about the Heidi Circle. So, and I was on the board of Heidi Museum of Modern Art. So I was out at Heidi an awful lot. And, you know, Sunday Reid was, you know, a devoted and very inspired gardener. So being on that particular piece of earth, and the property, you know, has a scar tree on it, a canoe tree. And that would have been like a songline tree. And so that would have been an important marker for the Indigenous people, the Wurundjeri people, who lived where Heidi is, Bulleen, Heidelberg, etc. So there's a lot of information that I got through art, you know, and I just was attentive, and I kind of listened, I guess, to what Sunday was actually doing. I watched how she changed that particular landscape, how she aestheticized it, how she planted, you know, very romantic sort of English gardens, and then, you know, thought, oh my God, what am I doing? Why aren't I planting natives? You know, what am I thinking? Oh, I'm crazy. That was quite late in her life, and she and John were very devoted gardeners and very devoted to the earth, you know, to the earth itself.
Sadly, I think since colonisation, we forced much on the land that was never meant to be there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, where I live here, I live on a wetlands. Elwood is actually below sea level. Where I live, it's below sea level. And so we get inundations, we get flooding. And, you know, it was a wetlands, it was a paradise for the Yalukit Willem people. I mean, there was everything you could possibly want to eat. You know, it was like you just had to, you know, there was a kangaroo over there, there were oysters, there were, you know, everything you could want was just here for those people. So they had a lot of opportunities to create culture, you know, to sing and dance and tell stories. There's a wonderful tree I talk about in the book. It's River Red Gum. It's between 300 and 500 years old. It's just near St Kilda Junction. And there's a photograph of it in the book, and it looks like it's so powerful. And that was another of the songline trees that were like the one out at Heidi. So that's where people would gather and ceremonies would take place. And it's called the Ngagi tree or the Korowai tree. And it's still flourishing. You know, 500 years later, it's looking great.
And long may that continue.
Yeah.
You also speak with great affection for the silver birch trees that are found around Elwood. And you mentioned that this just fascinated me, a team of Finnish and Hungarian scientists recently discovered that these trees undergo physical changes at night, whereby their branches droop as much as 10 centimetres, which has been likened as sleep.
Yeah, they sleep.
That's
great.
I want to know,
they go to sleep
what
at night, like we all need to
do. What do you think we dream of?
What, sorry, Sally?
So what I wanted to know is, what do you think they dream of?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. Well, I suppose they dream about maybe they dream about their growth. Maybe they dream about, are they getting enough water, you know, and what's their relationship? There's a few of them down the sideway here, just over there. Yeah, Betula pendula, the silver birch. And they're, of course, as you know, very beautiful, sort of romantic trees. They have these long branches that are like sort of long hair, you know. And John Keats wrote about them, you know, oh, the silver birch, oh, the beautiful lady of the woods. And they are very feminine. And yeah, that's a wonderful question. I'll have to cogitate upon that. What do they dream of? It's lovely.
You'll dream about them tonight, and I'll speak to you.
Yeah, indeed, yes.
There's a chapter in your book about arboreality, which is the act of living in trees. That was a fascinating chapter. And you tell us how pre-Homo sapiens spent most of their time in trees to keep themselves safe from the saber-toothed cats and 200-kilogram bear otters. And you also speak about the Korowai people of West Papua, who still live in trees due to the high rainfall of the region, and also for cultural reasons. But of course, predominantly humans live on the land now, except for Miranda Gibson. She was an absolutely amazing person. So for 449 days, she lived on a 3-metre platform, 60 metres above the ground, in a 400-year-old eucalypt in Tasmania's Tyenna Valley. And the determination and resilience of this young woman just left me with incredible admiration for her belief in what she was doing was right. I just wonder if you could tell us a little bit about Miranda and what her cause was, but also how she felt once she was earthbound again. That was really interesting.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, Miranda Gibson, she belonged to an environmental, very active environmental group. And what they decided to do was they decided to shin up this tree because there was logging that was going on nearby, and they were concerned that this tree might be cut down. So they had to, suddenly the logging started to happen very quickly. So they had to get up, get Miranda up the top of the tree. They built a platform, and she attached herself to the tree with a kind of a buckle and a rope. So even if her platform fell, she would still be safe, she wouldn't fall. And so, yeah, she was up there for that extraordinary amount of time. She didn't come down to the ground at all. Bob Brown went up and, gave her a hug at Christmas, and she was doing yoga exercises and sit-ups, so her muscles didn't atrophy. And then she had the birds, and the birds that were really interested in her were the Korawongs, who were very smart birds. And so when her food would be hoisted up to her, the Korawongs would turn up and sort of go, what have you got? You got anything for us? And she was also in contact with people all around the world. Like, she was talking to school groups and all sorts of people all around the globe, and receiving a great deal of support from Nick Cave, amongst other people, who all were watching what she was doing. And when she finally came down from the tree, and the last few months were there was a lot of solitude, like she wasn't really seeing that many people, and she felt she had was having this relationship was developing with the tree. And then when she came down to the ground, and I interviewed her and I said, how did you feel? And she said, well, I thought I'd be really thrilled to be back on the ground. I wanted to have a hot bath. I've been thinking about all these things for months. I can do this, I can do that. And she's like, but I wanted to be back in the tree, actually. I didn't actually want to be on the ground. And she said it really disconcerted her, and she really didn't have an answer for that, but she felt that she and the tree connected. And she told me this a couple of years later. She said, I still feel like that. I still feel like I'm part of that forest. And it's very interesting. She didn't want to start saying, she didn't want to turn it into a sort of like spiritual or transcendent moment. She was just open and querying about it and saying, well, what was that? What did happen there? Of course, Peter Wolleben, who many of you will know, who wrote The Hidden Life of Trees, he's a forester, a German forester, and he looked at the kind of subtle underground connections that trees literally build with one another, support one another, give each other nutrients or water. So there are kind of lots of tree families, and I think initially this was seen as, kind of fanciful, but there's more and more scientific proof for this. So I think what we feel about trees actually, I think, will turn out to be accurate, that, yeah, they are amazing, sensitive beings. They do have their own communities and their children, their challenges, and all these sorts of things that are going on in their life, like things that are going on in our life. So it's of course what, First Nations people have always believed, they're animists. They've always felt that incredibly deep engagement with the natural world.
We just have to relearn it, don't we?
We do, yeah. We have to get off our arrogant Homo sapiens top of the pecking order ladder, and get down onto the earth with the trees.
Yep, yeah. So as you say, Indigenous cultures have always known about sentience and the intelligence of trees, and now there are more and more non-Indigenous writers talking and writing about this as well. And in your book, you mention a biologist, Daniel Chamovitz, who Yeah, so he just a little quote from him. Plants monitor their visible environment all the time. Plants see if you come near. They know when you stand over them. They even know if you're wearing a blue or red shirt. And I read a quote recently by a UK nature writer and BBC radio producer, Tim D, was describing a nature writing course that he was teaching. And he said that his students should be prepared to look at a hedge or a tree for long enough to feel it looking back at them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a fantastic piece of advice.
I think so. And it made me think, have you ever felt looked at when you're in the bush or by a tree?
Well, I do talk about this one moment I had with the sugar gum a few years ago. A sugar gum that's near where I live, and there's a whole cohort of sulphur-crested cockatoos who live there. There are ravens who live there. And I was just sitting in front of it, and suddenly it sort of something shifted, and it was like I could see as the tree saw. And what I could see was that we were just like blips, you know, like humans are just like doink, doink, doink like that to the tree, because their time, their tree time, I mean, they're children for a long time, they're adults for hundreds of years, you know, whereas we're just here for a short span of time. I did a bit of an experiment that I talked about in the book, where I went and sat with the tree and thought, you know, will I experience this again, or will I see as the tree sees, or will I dream about it? Or actually none of those things happened. Though I must say I felt quieter after doing this every day for a week. I felt really quiet when I was in the presence of the tree, and which made me even more respectful of it. So, I mean, I think, again, these are the things that will actually emerge once we get past the sort of I can't remember what, anthropomorphism, that horrible idea. Anthropomorphism is a lack of imagination. That's what anthropomorphism is. So I think we will get part of that past it, and I think scientifically we're kind of on the cusp of a whole lot of shifts, because, you know, there's so much concern about what's happening to the natural world. You know, I mean, really, it's terrifying.
It is, yeah. And I think finally more and more people are listening.
Yes, they are. I agree.
And in 2002, you were embroiled in a publishing ordeal and sought escape from it in the UK. And there you visited the Freud Museum, London, which is home to much of Freud's art collection. And you remark in the book that this museum had a significant impact upon you personally and professionally, and you went on to write The Gods of Freud. And to me, this chapter it just captures the way you have this incredible meandering quality of your book, and it's purposeful meandering though. And you take readers from a publication stoush to Freud, via Freud's couch and a Persian rug, to art, date palms, Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and a genome sequencing of the forbidden apple.
Yeah.
It was an amazing chapter. And it made me think, though, did your research unexpectedly lead you into this labyrinth of information, or was there some sort of pre-existing curiosity that you had anyway?
Not really. I mean, the experience in the Freud Museum, when I walked in and saw these 2,000 exquisite antiquities that Freud had collected, I was just blown away. And I was like, wow, you know, why don't I know about this or hear about it? Or how did he afford it? And, you know, just there were lots and lots of questions that I really needed the answer to. And so that's why I decided to write the book. But also it's lovely to return to the collection and that beautiful rug on, you know, Freud's couch, arguably the most famous piece of furniture in the world. And you've got this exquisite rug that was woven by women from Iran. I think they still might be, they're maybe not so much anymore. They used to be nomads. And, you know, the world doesn't really support much nomadism anymore, but they, you know, the women weave these exquisite rugs with no designs, no nothing, and they're so superb. And this is a paradise garden, you know, which is what the Garden of Eden was. I mean, it's a very ancient sort of image and a natural image. And there they are, they're nomads, they're travelling through Iran, they're travelling through countryside where there's very little water, and they're creating in these rugs these exquisite, watered, beautiful, rich gardens where, you know, oases, you know.
It's amazing. Religion plays a part in a number of your accounts of different trees and places. And in chapter 4, you say that Jesus's biography could be written in terms of trees as they stood as sentinels at each major chapter of his life. And I've been reading a bit of Thomas Berry lately. He's a US nature writer, environmentalist and theologian, and he is no longer with us, unfortunately. And he speaks about the changing human relationship with trees over time. And he claims that we started to degrade the natural world around the time of the Enlightenment or Christianity, when we stopped looking down to Mother Earth, as Indigenous cultures everywhere always had, and looked instead up towards the Heavenly Father. And I wonder what your thoughts were about religion and our changing relationship with the earth.
Well, as probably comes across in the book, I'm pretty anti-Christian. I don't like the kind of Christian view, and it comes across in Genesis where, you know, God says to Adam and Eve, you know, everything is for you to use. You know, you just use anything. It's all there for you. So there's no sense of like respect the earth, you know, try and align with the earth, which is very masculinist, and you know, Christianity is a very masculinist kind of religious culture. So I felt that, again, this kind of lack of imagination, lack of curiosity and lack of respect. And, you know, of course, it goes together with colonisation. I mean, that's what happened here in Australia. You know, as soon as the settlers turned up, they just started cutting all the trees down. I mean, it's obsessive, you know, what went on in this country, you know, swinging the axe, you know, bringing down every tree you could possibly bring down just for the sake of it. It's as though they were terrified of the trees. They couldn't look at the trees. So we're still kind of getting over that, you know, we're still making up for lost ground. And of course, also this has brought with it so many environmental catastrophes, this, you know, felling of the trees. Aboriginal people didn't do that. They were into land you know, conservatorship. They were interested in ways of looking after the land, you know, and if they had to do some fire stick farming, burning back, that was only done every few years, and it was very selective in terms of what they did. So, you know, that's why, you know, Sydney Parkinson writes that note about, when he arrived in New South Wales, it looks like a gentleman's park, he said. It was so beautifully arranged and everything. Well, that was because Aboriginal people were controlling and looking after. I mean, that's the saying, you know, for Aboriginal people. It's you don't own the land owns you. And you're expected to look after that land and take care of that land and be a steward and a custodian of that land to get the best out of that land. And I think we're finally beginning to learn that as well. I think we're finally beginning to really appreciate and understand that.
Let's hope we do it soon enough.
Yeah.
You talk about Virginia Woolf in a chapter titled Knowing Trees, and you speak of her love of the natural world, but also the difficulty she has in grasping its presence with words. You quote her as saying, "I cannot hold this, I cannot express this, I am overcome by it, I am mastered." And later in this chapter, you refer to Freud again and his belief in animism, which is a belief that the earth and everything on it, whether that be animals, plants, rocks, rivers, oceans, seas, even weather systems, possess a distinct spiritual essence. And on this you say, and quite beautifully, it's not human, it's nature, but more than that, deeper than that. It's a presence that seems intimate yet other, within and everywhere, immediate and endless. You feel it, it sees you. Then the experience blurs, shivers and disappears, and you're left wondering what has occurred. And it makes me think, do you think nature locks us out sometimes? Is that why we can't write about it? Or do we lock nature out? And if so, what is the purpose of either?
Well, yeah, I was really fascinated. You know, I loved the geography of friendship. I liked the way it was structured. It was a really excellent, tight structure, but still you had meandering in there as well, and all sorts of surprises.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I felt that in your book as well, that we experience these things. We don't want to necessarily encode them and name them, and you know, kind of. It is good that it is open, and that's what I liked about Virginia's words. You know, they're the words that we all feel, and it's sort of good to have a bit of, well, you know, we're Westerners, we've got self-doubt and critical thinking built into our, you know, genomes probably, and I think that's helpful. Maybe it makes us a little bit more respectful if it's mysterious, if we can't unlock it, you know.
That's a great point. Yeah, because it is hard to write about nature. It's hard to write about nature differently.
Yes, it is.
It is.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I think we need new ways of approaching it. And that's why I talked about Janet Lawrence, who's a very, very brilliant Sydney artist, who works with nature all the time and is deeply involved as an activist and makes the most exquisite work. And, you know, it's interesting to just sort of look at the way she admires and respects and collaborates with nature. And there are so many artists who are now doing that, you know.
And it's beyond the senses, isn't it? You know, we have to look beyond what we can see or smell. We have to look to what we feel, what it does to us inside.
Yes.
I think that, to me, that is the new way of nature writing now. That is, I hope, will be a more direct of it going forward. Yeah.
Yes, I hope so too.
So in the chapter Trees as Victims, you talk about the logging industry and the indiscriminate clearing and ring barking that occurred, which you've already spoken about, especially during white settlement. And you speak about humans desiring dominion over nature at all cost. I read an article in Griffith Review, which was in the issue titled Writing the Country, and this article's by Jane Gleeson White. And in it, she makes a really strong claim that trees should be considered for their natural capital. That is to say that they should be given a dollar value for what they contribute, such as for recreation, benefits to mental health, carbon capture, because only then will economists factor them into the world.
Exactly, that's right, because we see everything in terms of money. And I do talk about a park that's not far from me, Faulkner Park, which is in South Yarra, and many of the trees in that park have been assessed for their financial worth. And it's a great thing, because it means that if somebody comes along and says, oh, we're going to get rid of those Moreton Bay figs, well, you can't, because they're worth, you know, $15,000 each or something. So it's a way of protecting them. And of course, legally, there's a big movement on to, there's the Wanganui River in New Zealand. That's just been made a person. It has a legal entity, and the local people, the local First Nations people, are the spokesperson for the tree. For the river. So if something needs to happen to the river, or it needs to get rerouted, or whatever is going on, they speak for the tree as the custodians of the tree, and that has legal rights. That is legally, you know, how it is.
Rights of nature, the same as human rights. Let's wish they'd done that for the Amazon.
Oh, yeah, I know. Well, there's not much of the Amazon left. I mean, Bolsonaro, who's the insane Trump-like president, is just told the loggers, go for it. Burn as much down as you want to burn down.
To run cattle, which are so destructive to the environment. I found the chapter Women of the Banyan. It was a really deeply affecting chapter, and I read it as the Delta strain was going through India, and the terrible death toll that occurred due to that, and the obvious increased number of widowed women that would have been there as a result. And because this chapter is about widowed women, and I wondered if, just for the benefit of people who haven't read your book, because it was such a beautiful chapter, I thought could you tell us a little about the ritual of binding of the banyan tree, which is practiced by the women of India?
Yeah, this is a ritual which takes place once a year. And what the local women do is they get these different kinds of strings, red and yellow and white strings. And on a particular day, this is happening, well, it happens all over India, but I focus on Varanasi because Varanasi is the most sacred site in India. And so what the women do is they find a local banyan tree, which are big trees. They're sort of like Moreton Bay figs. They've got that very kind of thick trunk, and they wrap around the tree. It's a spell. It's a magical spell to keep their husband safe. Because if something happens to their husband and they become widows, their lives are basically not worth living. I mean, there was the practice of sati, you know, where widows would throw themselves on the funeral pyre of their husbands. I mean, the English colonials stopped that practice happening. But look, it's in there. It's still there in a way. They're not being thrown on a funeral pyre, but they are being condemned to a lifetime of poverty, because for a husband to die, that is regarded as his wife's fault, no matter what happened. No matter what happened, it's her fault. She has to pay. And so the older women have to beg on the streets, and the younger women are forced into prostitution. And it's just hideous, you know, and this is going on now. It was hard to believe. There are thousands of these women in places in Varanasi, you know, where everybody's going to if somebody's going to get buried or burned rather, and then their bodies are sort of put in the Ganges, and that ends the cycle of rebirth. And so what the women pray for is to also end the cycle of rebirth, because who wants to be reborn if you're going to be reborn as a widow? It's just awful. And it's still happening. And so this spell that the women are doing, you know, it's just like so tragic, because it's they're sort of begging, you know, and the person who's actually going to do the worst thing to the widow is going to be probably her mother-in-law, who will throw them out on the streets and or perhaps kill them. So it's extremely violent and very, very frightening. Women are just commodities, and they're not commodities that have very much worth in India, you know. It's still got the highest rate of child brides in the entire world.
And they look to the trees to cast a spell to change that.
Yeah, they walk around the tree and they put more and more of these, and they're sort of praying and singing, and as they're doing it, you know, like, save me, don't let me die, don't let my husband die. You know, it's like, it's so desperate.
Powerful image. Yeah. Chrissy, have I got time for another question, or do you have? I'm just a bit conscious that I could keep talking forever, but I haven't had.
We don't have any questions yet. So if anyone has any questions from the audience, just type them in the area. So we'll go to you for one more, Sally. And if you do have a question after, we'll just take it at the end.
So this is in the final chapter of my forest. It's titled Trees as Witnesses, which is something I feel very deeply in my heart. But in it, you talk about trees that are found at two places of historical significance. Firstly, the old oak trees that overlook the slave cabins on Evergreen Plantation in Louisiana, and we can only imagine what they've overlooked. And that plantation is listed on the National Register of Historic Places in the US. And secondly, you speak about the trees in Nuremberg Park in Germany, which was the site of Nazi party rallies during the 1930s. So these are just two of the many places in the world where humanity was seen at its most debased. And maybe if we assume trees are sentient, that they have feelings and sense things and are aware of human existence and activities, then what do you think they make of our contribution to what Thomas Berry calls the singular earth community, which is he believes we broke our contract with the earth and that we no longer think of it as a singular earth community, and just wondering what trees would make of us.
That's a really good question. I like that idea about having us, you know, I think we've broken our contract, you know, with planet Earth, you know, of which trees are such an important emblem. When people think of nature, I mean, the first thing they think of is a tree. And yet we have denuded so much of the landscape of those trees. And it's interesting, like here in Elwood, which is, you know, was a wetlands, of course, they filled all that in and turned it into a very narrow creek. then, created sort of larger spaces, again, getting rid of all the trees as they possibly could. And Earthcare came in here in the late 1990s and planted over 1 million trees in Elwood. And the guy who was in charge of that operation, Maya Edelson, told me that since then, like, Elwood's climate has really changed. It's much cooler, it's more moist, because what had happened had become a kind of dust bowl, particularly down towards the beach, where a lot of they grazed cattle there from the middle of the 19th century on. So of course they just eat everything away, and we see this again and again all over Australia. We see what's happened to the to the desertification of the land, because the trees aren't there to hold the earth together. They've gone, so everything's just everything just gets blown away.
And that's a change in one suburb. Imagine if every suburb.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't have to be the whole suburb. There can be pockets of it that just get retreed.
Yeah, retreed. That'd be great.
We do have a question now, so I'll just go to that if I may. Janine, Satari's asked, what is your favourite tree?
Gosh, that's a good question. I think it changes, I have a bit of a crush on the sugar gum up the road a piece, and I'm kind of in love with the Ngagi, the corroboree tree, down near St Kilda Junction. Yeah, gosh, I don't know. I guess I'd pick those two as, trees I've got a crush on, sort of thing. Yeah.
And there's been a lot of comments about people's knowledge of really interesting facts about trees, which you've sparked as well, about when you're nice to plants and when you're nasty to plants, they grow in different ways. And also the community valuing of plants, the Tyler value, apparently it's called. Fascinating. I think this conversation has sparked all of these ideas, which is really excellent. So I think we may be coming to the end of our time here tonight. It has been absolutely fascinating, and I think what your book does is it does spark lots of little ideas. It's such a collection of it just ranges so widely, and I think that's the beauty of this book, is that it really it's obviously written by someone who has who's not just a scientist and have a particular way into looking at something, but someone who looks at something from lots of different perspectives. And Sally is holding that up again.
Beautiful. It is such a
I'd like to thank Sally for such a wonderful close reading of the book and all those wonderful questions. Thank you very much.
It was great to chat to you, Janine.
It was good.
A passion of mine. So to be able to read your book wasn't work, it was a joy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And thanks also to the 3 salon readers. It is
thanks, John and Cass and Jacqueline. Thank you.
It's so stressful to read in public for the first time, and particularly on Zoom. And you guys did an amazing job. So thank you so much to the 3 of you as well.
Thank you, Chrissy, as always. The greatest.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you.
It's been my absolute pleasure to host tonight, and thanks for joining us, Janine. Maybe next time we'll do this.
Maybe next time. Yeah, that's right.
Meet you virtually. Great.
Take care, all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
See everybody. Thank you.
Bye.